Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee for your dedication in the committee and for allowing me to speak, and to my fellow advocates. The NDIS, it's often said, is a plane being assembled in mid-air. A cliche because it's true, but it does not go far enough. The assembly instructions arrived in every language but English. No one on board agrees on what we're actually building, and as the ground rushes up, we're all hoping like hell that it is a plane. The honest question is not whose budget carries the blame, it's simpler. Wouldn't it be better if we just actually fixed it? So let me show you part of the problem here. A support worker arrives to care for someone, and she's wearing a home detention ankle bracelet. When I reported it to the Department of Magical Thinking, otherwise known as Quality and Safeguards, you'd never guess what I was told, that she had a right to work. We screened the school canteen volunteer harder than we screened her. That's not an isolated failure. It is the system working exactly as it's built. And families and participants were never all told. There is a world of difference between registered and unregistered, not always, but and many didn't even know that such a thing existed, that there was a difference. Many GPs have argued with me till they're blue in the face that there isn't such a thing as a registered or unregistered. It's the NDIS, of course they'll have everything. There's no choice without informed consent, and no informed consent without the information. You cannot hand someone a decision, withhold the one fact it turns on, and call it autonomy. The peak bodies fought hard for the right to choose. I want to know who fought quite so hard for the right to know what they were choosing between. The assumption that someone must have checked has a name. It's called social licence. The protection we extend to a system we are told to trust. We would be furious to call a plumber and find out they're not actually qualified to unblock a toilet, yet we sent unscreened, untrained, sometimes dangerous people to do the most intimate care for the most vulnerable people in the country, and we called it their choice. The question is not whether the NDIS costs too much. It is how did we spend such an extraordinary fortune and still get it so wrong? Well, here's my answer. Somewhere along the way, we decided the human rights model and the medical model were opposites. Now, I don't mean the medicalised model like it used to be. We chose rights and stripped any sort of medicine or clinical out. But a person is not a body or a set of rights. A person's both. And it is not a human right to deny the needs of the disability that places a person on the NDIS in the first place. Strip the clinical reality out in the name of choice and you do not get freedom. You get diagnosed, undiagnosed diabetes for years, medication that suppresses a person's breathing until they can only whisper, pressure sores, avoidable admissions, lives quietly shortened. I've seen every one of those, not in the records of the past, but in people alive today. We built the system as though capacity were a switch on or off. It's not. It's a spectrum, and it differs from one decision to the next. We cannot let people who cannot weigh a decision carry the choices that shape their own safety and then call the risk that follows autonomy. That is not choice, it's abandonment, wearing the language of choice. What we need is capacity assessment fit for purpose, one that accounts for cognitive function as well as physical, not a box tick that waves the question through and hopes for the best. And we cannot penalise or stigmatise people for their disability by relabelling it as behaviour. I really do object to that. A person's disability is not misconduct. Distress from an unmet need is not defiance. file disability under behaviour, and you punish the person for the very thing that put them on the scheme in the first place. And now we raise the penalties up to $16 million for a disability provider against roughly $1.5 million in aged care. Ask what that gap is really insuring against. It looks a great deal like the government's own incompetence. And it is written by governments that cannot meet their own standards. In my state's own Auditor General found the South Australian Government, a registered provider of course, non-compliant on billing and paying its own disability workers outside their award. But here is the part that should stop this committee cold. You cannot withhold the very information that makes safe care possible. If I FOI something from the NDIA and I have the participants' consent and it's not shared, and then say I go and spend $3,000 to get said medical documents and I discover things that really change things, there's a problem. The handover, the history, the risk, and then penalise the provider for the absence of the practice you made impossible. You cannot make good practice impossible and then fine its absence. Give providers what they need to risk manage, or do not pretend the failure is theirs. In my state, the government is the 4th largest disability provider, South Australia, by the way. Not by ambition, by default. It kept the most complex people itself because in 2017 it told the Productivity Commission the sector could not safely take care of them, then did nothing to build that capacity. On its own audited figures, its direct service costs about $136 million when they remembered to bill for it. A year to deliver against $133 million it bills the scheme. It was $236 million it cost, and they were only able to bill $133 million. And with a net loss of around $103 million to serve roughly 471 people. And that sits inside a disability program running at an audited net result, near negative $950 million a year. This is the level of government closest to the coalface, and even it cannot make the model work. Meanwhile, the people who actually do this work, where the safeguarding actually resides, are treated as though they wipe bottoms and chop carrots. We need trained, dedicated, committed staff. Instead, we build worker exploitation and a student visa culture of untrained labour into the very substrate of care. That workforce costs the country around $300 million a year in workers' compensation. I'm yet to see an NDIS plan that accounts for the weight of the participant and needing 2 support workers. On Safe Work Australia's own figures, healthcare and social assistance now carries the highest number of serious injury claims in the country. Nearly 30,000 a year, 1 in 5 nationally. Psychological injury is up 160% in a decade. Assaults have more than doubled since the turn of the century. And behind those numbers are women who are asked, the indignity support workers who are asked to use a she-we. And we send them in blind. We hide the information that keeps them safe and enables providers to do risk management. A young female support worker is sent alone into a home where a man is under a forensic order or has a history of sexual offending. Not all the time the provider or the support worker knows. And told nothing about what she's walking into. That's not privacy. That's a safety failure waiting to become a headline. And there is no training to recognise serious mental illness, no way to identify it, no idea what to do when it presents. Ask the mental health triage lines now swamped with NDIS calls. What happens when you put untrained staff in front of acute illness? So let me say this plainly to anyone who frames NDIS cuts as a saving. You have no right to call it a saving. When you are not removing the cost, you are only moving it. Cut a person's support and they do not obediently stop needing care. They surface in the emergency department, on the ambulance ramp, in the mental health unit, in the justice system, in child protection, in homelessness. and most of these are the state's cost. That is not fiscal responsibility. It's detonating the bill in someone else's budget and calling the crater a surplus. And there is no saving when the system manufactures the very cost it complains about. Poor care does not simply fail a person, it makes them more disabled. They cost more. Undiagnosed conditions, pressure sores, over-medication, infections, the slow harm of neglect, each one anew. Often permanent comorbidity laid on top of the original disability. Their needs grow, their funding grows, and then that growth is held up as proof they were high cost all along. You'll never cut your way out of rising costs that the scheme is causing. So name the fixes plainly. Run some sort of a medical model alongside the human rights model so we can acknowledge the needs. Not instead of it, but make handover mandatory. Make sure providers are able to do the risk management. Give providers the information they need to risk manage. Require that the person at the door is qualified, screened and known. We had this big to-do with all the childcare centres, but we don't have with non-verbal children in homes where there's not the supervision of a childcare centre. Write a capacity law worth the name and turn the accountability back into the agency and the commission that designed this. Not only onto the providers, the workers, the participants and the families holding it together at the edges. Because here is what should trouble this parliament most. We have reviewed everyone, but the people responsible for the mess. A royal commission, a review, inquiries into providers, workers, participants, but no serious scrutiny of the architects. And nothing about us without us has quietly become nothing about us without some of us. Never all of us. Yes. The quietest people...
Sorry, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The quietest people, the ones without the capacity to advocate, vanished from the conversation entirely. To the support staff who work tirelessly and donate their own time, I see you. To the mums and dads and spouses who support unsupported, I see you. To the providers who sacrifice their livelihoods to fill the reality gap and subsidise the government, hang in there. You are my faith in humanity, all of you. And to the participants who live in fear, I see you too. And I will leave you with what I have come to believe. After all of it, the systems are worse than the people. The institutions are crueler than the individuals who staff them. Cruelty is almost always systemic before it is individual. And what stands out across all of it is the gap between what people are capable of and what their structures allow, which means the work of fixing this is not done at the level of individual virtue, not the worker, not the family, not the provider doing their best. It is done at the level of structure and at the level of architecture. It is time for the system and the administrative triad to be held accountable for their incompetence and maladministration. And let me be clear, I do not ask for anything I do not already give. Canberra is a registered provider. I am audited, I am scrutinised, I am on the front line, and I pay with my body too. I have already stood in that queue. So to the parliament that will demand competence, handover, accountability and humility from a broken sector, I say only what I have said before, by all means, but you first, mate.